Hello and welcome to Our American Government. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time, we looked at the Constitutional Convention and particularly the differences that the states had to overcome in order to create our nation. Today, we are going to be looking at the structure and the principles behind the United States Constitution. Let's see what they are. First, let's remember that the United States Constitution is created by a nation that has undergone two very distinct experiences. One, the tyranny of King George III, which we fought the American Revolutionary War to escape. And then we had the Articles of Confederation, a reaction to that tyranny, which created a weak and ineffective government. The United States Constitution, its goal was to be a balance between the two. Not too strong, but not too weak. Now, what they created was a very simple and brief constitution. It very intentionally did not spell out every detail of our government, and it has been described as a skeleton or as a framework for American government. Future generations have been left to interpret how that government is meant to apply to them and their situations. This was done intentionally. Now, within the Constitution, there are three separate and distinct parts. The very beginning is called the Preamble. The Preamble is just a fancy word for introduction, and it is the first part of that Constitution. Its purpose is to explain the purpose of the U.S. government. The Preamble explains why we have a government. And there are 6 purposes which are explicitly outlined in that Preamble. It reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Therein listed are the purposes of government: more perfect union, establish justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, that is, our children and their great-great-grandchildren. The Articles, the second part of the Constitution, are really the body and the framework of the Constitution itself. The Articles are the Constitution. Now, the first 3 articles are what created our government. They created the Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary in Articles 1, 2, and 3. And within those articles, they outlined the jobs and responsibilities of each branch. Later on, the 6th article will explain that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that the federal government has to follow the Constitution, and so do state and local governments. In the 5th article, they explain how the Constitution can be amended. And it's very important that we have a Constitution that can be amended and changed, because times change, and what we expect from our government changes. 27 times in our history, the Constitution has been changed, although 10 of those were done in the first year. Now, the founders wanted this, and they wanted it intentionally. They wanted it to be able to change, but they wanted it to be difficult to change. They didn't want it to change too much or too easily. And so they made it a very challenging process, one which we'll get into in a later lesson. Now, the major principles of our government, wrong principle. There we go. 2 different spellings of principle for 2 different words. Make sure we're talking about the right one. There are several principles of the American government which need to be carefully protected. Those principles we're going to get into in a moment, but they are popular sovereignty, federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, and limited government. Let's take the first one first. Popular sovereignty basically just means rule by the people, and it means what it means. In the United States, the people rule. And our government is not free to act without the authority of the people that they govern. That is, we will vote members into government. They will act with our authority. If we do not like what they do, we don't vote for them the next time. So don't complain about government. Go out and vote. Federalism is the next one. This is the basic idea of sharing government powers between central and regional governments. Here in the United States, we have a national government, and we have 50 state governments, and they all share a degree of power. The federal government, as you know, is in Washington, D.C., and each state has its own state capital, its own governor, its own legislature, its own court system. Now, the separation of powers, which we've already discussed, this was Montague's idea for weakening the power of government. In our system, we divided our government into 3 branches. We do that with our 3 articles. We have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And with their powers divided up in this way, no one branch can become so powerful that they dominate our government. Checks and balances is another limitation to our government's powers. It's a way to keep any one of those branches from potentially becoming too powerful. Each branch has some power and some authority to limit the powers of others, and therefore leave the 3 branches of government in some sort of balance. Many would argue today that this balance is off, that the presidency and the executive branch is too powerful. If you would like to see that changed, make sure that you vote. There's another kind of check that I like, especially when it's a red wing. All right. Judicial review. Federal court system has the power to declare that the actions of government are unconstitutional. This is one of the checks that our judicial system has, but it's a very important one and worth discussing separately. Basically, the idea here is that all laws, be it something written to govern just your town or your state or the entire government, has to be in line with the U.S. Constitution, or it is unconstitutional and therefore illegal. The federal court system has the power to determine which laws are constitutional and which are not, and the Supreme Court has the final say on any of those decisions. That brings us to an all-encompassing view of limited government. The Founding Fathers were afraid that government would become too powerful. They were more concerned about this than the alternative, the weak government. So they put in place all those structural limits which we have just talked about, the checks and balances, federalism, etc. But they also added, very shortly after the Constitution was written, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was a response to anti-federalist pressure, saying that there were not enough freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution. So the very first Congress passed 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that served to protect both individual and state rights. Next time, we're going to be looking at the 3 branches of government themselves for a view of their basic responsibilities. We'll be getting much more in depth with each of these branches later on, but I'd like to give you an overview the next time we speak. Thank you for joining my lesson today, and farewell.